In the world of video games, subjectivity is a constant. It's an industry where someone's favorite game can be absolutely despised by someone else, and while this can be true of anything in life, I feel it's exemplified in video games more than anything. There are so many different layers to creating a game that most people will find fault with at least one aspect in particular. Even if you love a game to death, you might still think it has a few flaws. However, there's at least one game that I believe breaks this mold. In the early spring of 1994, Nintendo would release a title that would change the landscape of the gaming industry forever: Super Metroid. This side-scrolling action-adventure perfected the pre-existing formula of its predecessors and pioneered a whole new genre, aptly named Metroidvanias. The advent of this genre and everything Super Metroid did for it is awe-inspiring and has left me with one conclusion. Super Metroid is a masterpiece that executes everything it sets out to do flawlessly. That's a bold statement, isn't it? But it's one I strongly believe I can back up with evidence, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. But before we start, a little disclaimer. I am going to be spoiling so much of this game. If you haven't played it yet and are interested even a little bit in doing so, I strongly suggest you go do it right now. This game is an experience unlike any other, and the magic of your first playthrough only happens once. If you want to play it, there's a couple places you can get it on the Switch, through Nintendo Online. It's on the Wii U. It's on, well, not the Wii anymore because they don't have the eShop. The SNES Classic. You can buy an original cartridge for the Super Nintendo. You got options. But with that out of the way, let's get started. In the development world, a common way to organize or describe a game is through the fundamental pillars of design. These pillars represent the foundation of what a game is, how it functions, and what the draw should be. In a sense, you could argue that how well a game accomplishes the criteria for each of its pillars could correlate to the quality of the game itself. In Super Metroid's case, there are three pillars in particular: the atmosphere, the level design, and the power fantasy. Each of these categories drives every design decision made for the game and can be broken down into numerous subcategories. But before analyzing these elements, I believe it's important to provide a basic understanding of Super Metroid's story. You play as Samus Aran, a galactic bounty hunter who takes on a variety of jobs, but which typically revolve around protecting the galaxy from various threats that crop up. Directly following the events of Metroid 1 and Metroid 2, which the game gives you a brief summary of, Samus Aran has eradicated every last Metroid in existence. Except for one, a larva that mistook her for its mother. Seeing this, Samus decided to bring it to the Galactic Research Station at Ceres so they could study the Metroid's ability to produce energy. The scientists discovered that the latent powers of the Metroid could be used for the progress and advancement of society, and satisfied with their findings, Samus took her leave of the research station to search for bounty work elsewhere. However, nearly the moment she left, Samus picked up a distress signal from Ceres Station. This is where I want to take a moment to set the stage for Super Metroid's opening. Upon arriving back at the station, something is off. The area is eerily quiet, the suffocating silence broken up only by the droning hum of scientific machines and the damp echo of your own footsteps. Once you have found the chamber where the Metroid is being held, you notice its cage is shattered, with the Metroid itself nowhere to be seen. Corpses of the scientists you had just spoken with not long ago litter the floor surrounding you. After inspecting the station further, you eventually come across the baby Metroid sitting alone in the center of a small room. Dark and unable to see anything within the thick shadows, you're immediately ambushed by Ridley, an incredibly powerful space pirate, who then proceeds to kidnap the Metroid and initiate a self-destruct sequence on the space station, leaving you seconds to escape before its imminent destruction. This is what we call establishing atmosphere, the first pillar of the game's design. Within the first 5 minutes, you, as the player, have obtained knowledge that introduces you to the world, set the tone of a bleak and frightening narrative, while simultaneously investing you in said narrative. However, this is only the first step that was taken to immerse the player. The world of Super Metroid itself is incredibly vast, comprising of several distinct areas. Criteria, the first place you encounter upon arrival, is incredibly desolate. The planet's surface is riddled with crags and very little vegetation, making it less than ideal for species to live there. Brinstar, an overgrown jungle biome lurking beneath the crust, is the complete opposite. Large vines encompass the natural walls surrounding you. The animal and plant life here becomes increasingly more lethal the deeper you explore, as do the hazards that stand in your way. It is an incredibly harsh environment that the species living here have adapted to survive in. And at the edge of Brinstar lies the entrance to Norfair, a treacherous cavern of magma and brimstone. The rooms themselves radiate a heat that is nearly impossible to pass. The life here is vile and dangerous, a parallel to the hellish landscape they inhabit. Meridia, on the other hand, is an aquatic labyrinth that seeks to disorient you at every turn. Thick pools of quicksand can easily thwart any hope of navigation if you aren't careful. These are just a few of the locations that can be found in Super Metroid, but there is something else that elevates all of them to a higher level of immersion, something that you've been experiencing this whole time: the music. The game's soundtrack, composed by the wonderful duo of Kenji Yamamoto and Minako Hamano, is a prime example of composition through intentionality. Every track in the game is composed to represent each area you may find yourself in and the emotions you should be feeling while exploring them. This is hardly a revolutionary idea for music production, but is something that Yamamoto and Hamano excel at. Atmospheric chord progressions are followed by incredibly memorable melodies in an effort to pull the player in. Different themes use different instruments to match the locations they are placed in and provide a sense of variety. Super Metroid's soundtrack is incredibly dynamic, and every note played is purposeful. Here are some of my favorite moments from the OST. This clip from Alex and Chris of the Super Beard Bros really sums it up best, in my opinion.
Gonna fall down. Can you like shout out to the music of Metroid? It's really good.
Dude, I always tell this to people, if you have a chance to do this, like if you bought like the SNES Classic, or you have a Wii U with this game on it or something like that, where you can hook it up to some pretty good speakers.
Oh, and like have like a really good sound quality?
Yeah, just like do it the way that you would do it for like God of War or something, you know, like
That'd be fucking
like
hype.
a brand new game. The soundtrack is so scary and so good.
It's really atmospheric in a really good way.
You really feel the alien
This is rough.
inspiration.
Absolutely. I love that about this game.
You're the alien.
The level of immersion at play from the soundtrack itself provides a phenomenal backdrop to keep the player engaged with the world around themselves, and a desire to keep moving forward and to explore, while also imposing a variety of emotions that the developers want you to experience. You want to see what is waiting for you in the next room. You want to find more secrets to help you on your journey. The motivation from playing comes from a natural curiosity, rather than a superficial need to move forward provided by the game itself. Something else that lends itself to this is the sprite work within the game. From the environment to Samus herself, everything is designed with complete intentionality and cohesion. The color palettes used are incredibly easy on the eyes, while also being beautifully detailed. It makes every area feel vastly different. Not to mention, Samus herself literally has dozens of sprites for every small action she performs in the game. Sprites aren't just designed with looks in mind, they can also give away clues or be used to understand certain maneuvers that Samus can perform. Boss designs are incredibly intricate and occasionally multi-layered, creating an intense sense of scale. Environments all have detailed themes that differ greatly from the last. Samus's abilities are vibrant and impactful, creating a satisfying punch when blasting through enemies with different beams or mowing them down with suit upgrades such as the screw attack. The art style is timeless, still holding up 26 years later. The general ambiance and mood of the game itself really reminds me of Breath of the Wild to an extent. In a lot of aspects, Breath of the Wild and Super Metroid are incredibly similar. Both games place a heavy emphasis on their worlds and how the player interacts with them. Breath of the Wild's soundtrack, though minimal, is incredibly atmospheric, making it feel like you're really exploring a living world where nature has taken over. Things like this really click with people. People want to escape into the world of the games they played. They want to feel like they're a part of it, and Super Metroid does just that. The second pillar of Super Metroid's core philosophy is arguably the most important: the level design. If I had to choose one word to describe the design philosophy behind Super Metroid, and by extension other Metroidvanias of the same caliber, I would use dynamic. Let me explain. From the very beginning of the game, when you first set foot on Zebes, Super Metroid provides the player with options for where they can go. While some areas may be blocked off at first, you can always come back later to finish exploring. Criteria serves as a vast and interconnected hub to every other biome and locale you will find. In fact, every area upon Zebes shares these traits. Most rooms you will find will almost always have a multitude of pathways for you to take, some of which hide secrets. Others may grant you access to whole new sections of the area you're in. This level of depth that every environment in the game provides makes it fun just to move around and explore all that surrounds you. Super Metroid was also one of the first games to provide an overworld map that's accessible at any time. There are also map stations scattered across the world that will give you access to the overall layouts of each area, and while most rooms are shown on these maps, not all of them are. This provides players with a taste of what is to come without revealing everything. Some rooms on the map are completely separated from the rest, leading players to assume that some areas must be hidden from view. After visiting these locations, you will often have to backtrack to previous areas to make more progress. While mundane sounding at first glance, this is where the beauty of Super Metroid comes into play. Nearly every area houses a plethora of entrances and exits to the surrounding areas. There is no form of fast travel in the game, so in order to make any sort of meaningful progression, you will need to explore the world around you to figure out how to return to previous points of interest as quickly as possible. This, in itself, is a sort of game. The world could be equated to a puzzle, like these wooden puzzle cubes right here. The end goal being to solve the cube, or in this case, visit every place the map has to offer. Another game that accomplishes this and exudes Metroidvania energy is Dark Souls, actually. The first half of the game follows a similar layout. In the beginning, you only have access to a few areas. You can go up from Firelink Shrine, into the Burg and the Parish, or down into Dulando Ruins and the Catacombs. But as you progress, more areas open up. You can obtain a key that leads you down below the Burg and into the Depths and Blighttown, or if you started with the Master Key, you can forego that completely and take the elevator into New Londo Ruins towards the Valley of the Drakes, which also connects back to Blighttown and even the Darkroot Base and a Darkroot Garden. Fast travel does exist, but not until the halfway point in the game, meaning you need to find the best way around yourself while avoiding death as much as possible. Dark Souls is a Metroidvania, or at least in spirit it is. Its world design reflects this, and because of that, it's one of the strongest elements that fans praise to this day. People tend to love this about games, this design philosophy that revolves around these open, interconnected worlds. It's satisfying, encourages experimentation, and respects player intelligence without any sort of hand-holding. And that's why Super Metroid's level design is such an important aspect of the game. Provided you have the necessary tools, there's nothing stopping you from traveling from one end of the world all the way to the other. Want to make your way back to Criteria? Well, there's 4 different routes you can take to get there. How about Meridia or Brinstar? You've got lots of options. Norfair? There's only one real entrance, but what path do you want to take to get to it? The world always has new ways for you to get around, which only expand the more powerful you become. That's why I described it as dynamic. Your path of progression changes with time, and you get to decide how you want to go forward, rather than being forced into a linear journey. Despite its openness, though, the game does a wonderful job of guiding the player where they need to go without any sort of direction given. There is always a way forward, and if you find yourself stuck, that's the game's way of saying that you missed something important. Perhaps it was an upgrade for Samus that you overlooked, or a door that you forgot you could open until now. Whatever the reason, Super Metroid heavily encourages the player to take their time and explore every nook and cranny of Zebes. Everything you find is worth something to you. Super Metroid's third and final pillar of design is the power fantasy, or how strong you become over time and how you are able to interact with the world around you. The freedom of choice and exploration previously mentioned mean absolutely nothing if there's no weight or sense of value added to them. Super Metroid is a game that can be rather difficult for the inexperienced at times, or early on in the game, but becomes progressively easier the more items you obtain and the more progress you make. However, this decrease in difficulty does not become unsatisfying. On the contrary, the unrivaled power that Samus can obtain throughout her journey becomes one of the most thrilling aspects of the game. Running through in-game areas at high speeds, completely ignoring any and all damage, while decimating all enemies in your path is incredibly cathartic, almost to an extreme, honestly. It's just plain fun to run through every area. But how do you get to this point? The primary gameplay loop of Super Metroid follows a key pattern. Explore an area to find upgrades, which then allow you to explore new areas that house even more upgrades, some of which you couldn't access before. Rinse and repeat. This is where you start to notice how the 3 pillars, atmosphere, level design, and power fantasy, intertwine and begin working together. Some of the items you can find are more straightforward, such as expansions to your missiles, super missiles, or power bombs. These will make short work of enemies and bosses and even allow you to open up certain locked doors, while others might be one of the 14 suit upgrades for Samus. These are very exciting to find and have a multitude of different uses. For example, the Ice Beam, an upgrade for Samus's arm cannon, not only allows you to freeze enemies, stopping them in their tracks and making for easy targets, but you can also use them as platforms to climb an otherwise unreachable area. Or the Varia Suit, which halves the damage you would normally take from enemies, while also making it safe to traverse incredibly hot rooms, like the ones found in Norfair. Or even the X-ray visor. While less important on second playthroughs, this handy device allows Samus to see all secret blocks that she could interact with, which is incredibly useful for finding upgrades that you may be missing. These items also give Samus the ability to pull off some pretty crazy maneuvers, some of which are required to access certain secret areas or items. Others are incredibly useful for traversing rooms quickly and eviscerating enemies. The Shine Spark is one such technique that allows Samus to use the speed booster to propel herself in a singular direction at high speeds, demolishing anything in her way. Or the Screw Attack can be paired with the Space Jump to allow Samus to infinitely jump and essentially one-shot most, if not all, enemies in her path, while also maintaining airtime. These techniques are incredibly powerful while doubling as efficient methods of transportation that make backtracking through all the areas of Zebes incredibly fun and rewarding, which, in a game that revolves around backtracking and exploring what you may have missed, is incredibly important. One of the key fundamentals to any Metroidvania is a satisfying movement sandbox, which Super Metroid has in spades. However, there are times when upgrades can be completely ignored for progression, and, with enough clever thinking, the player can sequence break into certain areas far earlier than intended. No glitch, no trick, just player skill. For example, this section in Lower Brinstar splits off into a few different directions. Normally, you would need the Ice Beam to climb the shaft, but with some precise wall jumping and timing, you can scale it early. This grants you access to both the X-ray visor and power bombs, which in turn lets you find even more areas you wouldn't be able to access otherwise. Or in Upper Brinstar, you can perform a trick called a Mach Ball here, which allows you to pass through these gates that you would normally need the speed booster for, giving you access to super missiles and a reserve tank early. These choices and the layout and progression of the game work in such a way that the player can continuously make progress without completely blocking them off if they didn't acquire all the upgrades in a certain order. After killing the 4 major bosses, Samus gains access to Torian, the final area of the game in the Space Pirates' private research facility. Torian is incredibly short compared to every other area in the game, but is far more impactful. After entering, Samus discovers that the Space Pirates have begun breeding even more Metroids from the larvae that they kidnapped in the beginning. Eventually, a ginormous Metroid appears and begins draining all the life energy from Samus, leaving her defenseless, but it stops. Recognizing her as its mother, the once baby Metroid releases her, horrified that it almost killed its own mother, and flees. This particular moment is the perfect setup for one of the best endings in any video game. After healing at a nearby recharge station, Samus pushes onward until she reaches a familiar-looking room. Mother Brain, the final boss of Metroid 1, is back. Using everything she has acquired up to this point, she quickly defeats Mother Brain once and for all. Except something isn't right. Mother Brain's true form rises from the ground, with one of the most badass, metal-sounding boss themes in gaming. A disgusting, towering monstrosity, Mother Brain now takes everything Samus can throw at her. Missiles don't seem to be enough, her attacks hit and they hit hard, and eventually, Mother Brain begins charging an attack unlike all of the rest. And rather than just telling you about it, I think I'll show you instead. This setup, the removal of player power and engagement, only to give it back tenfold, is one of the most jaw-dropping moments in a game I've ever played, especially for something that was released in 1994. It's cinematic, emotional, and empowering. Using the Hyper Beam to completely destroy Mother Brain is absolutely amazing and never gets old. But you aren't done. After Mother Brain is defeated, something that is a staple of the Metroid franchise begins. The escape sequence. A planet-wide self-destruct protocol is activated with the death of Mother Brain, and you have 3 minutes to make it back to your ship and to escape off the planet. This section further develops the power fantasy, allowing Samus to continue to use the Hyper Beam to destroy walls and other obstacles in order to escape. You'll eventually find your way back to the lower portion of Criteria, and then you're home free. And that's Super Metroid. Nintendo Research and Development 1, the team behind the game, did an incredible job of crafting an experience that ties every thread of its design into a singular, satisfying package. Everything works in tandem together. The music and art create a beautiful sandbox for the players to explore that is filled to the brim with different secrets and items that empower Samus and make the game engaging and fun. There is nothing I would change about the game. And that's what I love about it.